just all smiling because we're telling family memory stories. Need to do that sometimes, especially when you have relatives like we do. Anyway, today I'm teaching on in honor of Father's Day, and of course, you know, we wish everybody a happy Father's Day who observes it. And, you know, as somebody put on the internet at Mother's Day, if you want to wish anybody in the world a happy Father's Day, what's it to you? So we wish single parents a happy Father's Day, and fathers a happy Father's Day, and caregivers a happy Father's Day, and whoever you are, happy Father's Day. I'm tired of all this technical labeling, which is what we're going to talk about today, because the message today is a father to the labeled. And I want us to think about that for a minute, because whenever we start talking about people, they have a label. And so let's go through a nice long list of labels that people have. Black, white, gay, straight, bi are all labels that people have. And we hear all those labels all the time. But you know, we label people other ways, by profession: minister, nurse, teacher, banker, lawyer, janitor, garbage collector. However we label people in that vein. Or we label people in many other ways, and one of the most common ways that we label people is by their families. And I'll tell you a little story. When I was, I don't know, I might have been in 4th grade, 3rd or 4th grade, and I was in art class, and we had a substitute, and they wanted us to make cards for Father's Day because, see, up north, we don't get out of school in May. We get out of school at the end of June. We're not out of school the first week in May. We're out of school by the end of June, usually somewhere around the 21st, somewhere between the 19th and the 23rd, depending on how the calendar fell that year, and when we had stuff, and yada, yada, yada. And we had to make cards for Father's Day. And I said to the substitute, I don't have anybody to make this for. And he said, we start going through people. Well, do you have an uncle? No. Well, do you have an older brother? No. Well, does your mom have a boyfriend? No. Well, do you have somebody else you can make it for? No. He said, well, you can sit there and you can do whatever you want. And I still remember that, because at that point in time, now in hindsight, at 34 and a half, my class seems different than it did back then. When I was a little kid, though, I wanted a dad. Not the one I had, not the one that my mother left and that my parents were divorced. I didn't want my real biological dad. I just wanted a dad because I thought everybody else had a dad. And doesn't that just sound like a little kid? Doesn't that just sound like how kids process stuff? You know, we keep trying to make kids all deep and that they have all these problems because of this or that. Well, we're trying to put adult functioning into kids. As far as I was concerned and as far as my eye could see, everybody had a dad. Everybody didn't have a dad. Now, being 34 and a half years old and looking back over the class I went to and the kids I went to a school that actually took in a lot of kids that had problems. And so a lot of them there did not have a dad. Some of them there didn't have a mom. I went to school with a kid who, we went to a maple sugar farm and we bought maple sugar candy, and there was one that had a couple in it, and the kid who was sitting on the bus in front of me wanted mine because he wanted to have the mother intact. His mother broke, and he wanted to have it to give back to his mother when his mother came back. Well, his mother never came back. I don't know what the whole story with that was, but he had 2 brothers who were both older than him, and they were raised by his dad, and I, to this day, never saw his dad. I don't ever remember his dad at school. I think his dad had to work. I don't remember what was going on. But there were all kinds of different situations in there. One of the girls had divorced parents, and her dad was in the Navy, I think. He did something with submarines. He was gone for a long time. There were other people who had different circumstances and different things, but you didn't think about it that way. There were a couple of people, even in hindsight, that had step-parents. But when you're that age and all you do is think that there's something that's different, you want to be like everybody else. And so I wanted a dad because I wanted to be like everybody else, because I thought everybody else had one, and because I was labeled. I was from a quote-unquote, now we use that nice dramatic-sounding term so that, you know, people can make us sound like we're going to be serial killers, you know, that we had a broken home. And so you have a broken home and now you're broken, or or you're done, or you're this and you're that. And to this day, over 30, okay, I'm not 18, I'm not 16, I'm not 10, I'm not even 25 anymore. I still have people who come and who try to do that father thing to me. That you're broken, or you're missing, or you're lacking something because your dad's not around, or you didn't have the dad that you wanted, or you didn't have the dad of your dreams. And I started to get over that by the time I was a teenager, and I was in a different school. And I remember this story. I'm not going to mention the name because I don't even know if the person who this happened with even remembers it, but it's somebody that is on my Facebook, who we were having this event. We used to have a father-daughter dance every year at class night, which was this thing that they did for the 8th grade graduates, and it's October, so it's not even June yet. Class night's June 10th, and it's, you know, like October 3rd. And I go into school, and I don't even have my jacket off, and I didn't even take anything out of my bag, and she runs up and says to me, "What are you going to do during the father-daughter dance at class night?" And I looked at her, and now this is also a girl that didn't have a dad. And I looked at her and I said to her, "I'm going to go to the rented dad shop down on Main Street and I'm going to rent one for the night." Because at a certain point in time, I started realizing that people could label me all day long, but that doesn't mean that that's who I really was. And it doesn't mean that the way I feel about things and the way I think now is all because of that one thing. If you think about what we do with labeling, it's very bad. Technically, nobody in the world is fatherless because the Bible tells us that God is our Father. And so there is no such thing as a fatherless person. But because we want to be pop psychologists and we want to embrace the concept of the world and we want to send people to therapy for thousands and thousands of dollars, we make it a plight, we make it a label, we make it something that changes how we perceive ourselves, and we feel we need to take on what other people are saying about us. But God is the God of people who are labeled. Let's look at Psalm 68, and we're going to start in verse 1. And I like Psalm 68 because there's a lot of different teaching that comes from it, and we're not going to actually even look at the whole chapter. But it's an entire thing that heralds God. It's an entire thing that heralds who God is. And starting in verse 1, "May God arise, may his enemies be scattered. May his foes flee from before him. As smoke is blown away by the wind, may you blow them away." Sound like a song anybody knows? Yep. "As wax melts before the fire, may the wicked perish before God, but may the righteous be glad and rejoice before God. May they be happy and joyful. Sing to God, sing praise to his name. Extol him who rides on the clouds. His name is the Lord, and rejoice before him. A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. He leads forth the prisoners with singing, but the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land." Fatherless, widow, orphan, prostitute, whatever you want to call the different ones, those were labels in biblical time. They weren't quite as advanced as the labels that we embrace now. But they were labels because if you were quote-unquote fatherless, that meant that you had a mother that didn't have a husband, and that meant that you were of a certain economic status. It typically meant that you were poor. Because we didn't have the unemployment office, we didn't have assistance, and we didn't have any real professions for women. You see a few women here and there that did stuff, but you really didn't have the same economic status that you had if you had a husband. And that is still true today, because the majority of single mothers live in poverty. That's just a statistical thing, because the opportunities aren't there. Women don't make as much money as men, and we can all debate that all day long. Well, you don't have to do this, or you don't have to do that, or you don't have to fuss over making this many cents less on the dollar. Look, if I'm making 77 cents to your dollar to do the same job, that's wrong. That's stealing. We were talking about stealing. stealing this morning. That's stealing. That means that the corporations that are paying women less are stealing from them. And then you've got that women don't typically get jobs that they necessarily deserve that are compensatory with their education. And so if you've got kids and you're a single mom and the only job you can go get is at the gas station, then that's the job you got to go get is at the gas station. You don't have the convenience of sitting there saying, well, this job is beneath my level of education. You got to feed your kids. And then you get stuck in a job, it's not that easy to get out of it. So being fatherless had that same association back then. It often meant that your mother did something that might not be so quote-unquote honorable, probably prostitution. That's what people did back then. Or she was a domestic. She might have been a slave, or she might have been a servant, or she might have been somebody's maid, or she might have done things like that. And so to say that a kid was fatherless meant something. It had a lot attached to it. It meant that you didn't have the social status that you should have, and it was also a slam on your mother. It was like making those yo mama jokes that everybody used to do, that they used to do back and forth in the different battles. You know, well, your mama is so this, and your mama is so that, and then somebody goes, your mama, and then everybody jumps on him. But that's exactly what it meant. It had something attached to it, and it meant something about you. It meant that because your mother wasn't married, or your father was dead, or whatever it is that happened, that you were fatherless and that you were never going to be any more than you were right now because of your economic status. So, what do we label people as today who are fatherless? Well, we say they've got ADD, or we say they've got explosive disorder, or we say that they're lost, or we say that they've got fatherhood issues, or that they don't, if they're a girl, that they don't like men, or if they're a guy, that they're going to be gay, or if they're this, or they're going to be that, and we're labeled, and we hear it over and over and over and over again. But it says right here that God is a father to the fatherless. That God doesn't care about your economic status. He doesn't care about what your mama has to take care of you. He doesn't care about where you're at in your life. He sees you. He is your father because he is the father to the labeled. He's the father to the people that society have already said aren't socially what we want them to be, aren't fitting into the boundaries or the picture or the whatever that we would like them to be. And it says that he sets them in families. It's not an accident that he talks about the fatherless, the widows, and that he's holy in his dwelling, and then that he sets the lonely in families. That doesn't mean that everybody runs off and becomes the Brady Bunch, where you sneak a goat into your bedroom and for 30 minutes, and that's really the most serious problem that you have in your life. They had some issues. They had more in the beginning than they had toward the end. It got a little bit weird toward the end. You know, doesn't happen to everybody. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he sets them in biological families. We are supposed to be in church. We're supposed to be a family in church. I don't understand why we're going bio on this whole situation. And when I say bio, I mean biological. Why we're raising up the biological family and we're ignoring the church family. Why it's a holiday and suddenly nobody comes to church because they have to be with their families. Well, what about your church family? What about your family, bringing your family to church? Why does it always have to be that we are living and revolving around these nuclear ideas of family? And who decides what family is? But it says that he sets the lonely in families. And it also says, or the desolate in a homeland. That's in the subnotes. And that relates to being lonely, because if you're desolate, it means you don't have any money, and it means you don't have any property. And so being set in a homeland means he puts you in a place of security. And I don't understand why we don't talk more about this stuff beyond saying that it makes us uncomfortable. It challenges our concepts. And I don't know where we got so conventional in church. I don't know when we started picking up all this stuff in church, probably with groups like Focus on the Family, who come in and start telling y'all that your kids are all wrong and that they're all bonkers if you don't do this, and we need to raise up nuclear families, and we need to do this and that and something else. You want to know what? Life happens. And there are people who are fatherless. There are people who have single mothers or single fathers. There are people who have different circumstances. But we don't have to keep taking on all these labels and letting them define and change who we are and make them think that we are irreparable, because that's the message that they or a mother, or because somebody has a job you don't like, doesn't mean that you're going to be irreparable. Because the more people keep trying to tell us you're different, there's something wrong with you, there's something wrong with you, there's something wrong with you, the more you want something that everybody else has, the more you feel like you missed something, the more you feel avoided. And we need to reach a point where, like I did that day when I was in 8th grade, and I said, look, you know, you stop it. It's 9 months away. I'll go figure something out, or I'll sit down. Or as it turned out from what everybody told me, because I didn't wind up going anyway, they give you somebody to dance with. We don't have to feel so left out all the time and left out of the picture. And that's probably my primary reason why I don't typically like all these days. Because I feel that days like Mother's Day and Father's Day and Valentine's Day and even the holidays in general, where we see all these pictures of these happy little families that really don't exist. Let's put that in there too, who sit at the table and throw biscuits at each other and cuss each other out, or more like on Roseanne, where the mother comes and wants to know why Jackie doesn't have a husband, and they all start sitting there talking about abortion or something absurd, and then Roseanne chimes in and says, I wonder who told the abortion stories at the first Thanksgiving. Or some of these other days, whether it's Valentine's Day that starts people who are single feeling like they're missing something, or people who are married start nagging about getting a present, or Mother's Day someone lost their mother and they missed their mother, or Father's Day they missed their father, or didn't have a father, or didn't have a mother, or didn't have this, or were adopted, or whatever, and it just starts making everybody start thinking about what's wrong with them. But you know what? If you are a dad and you are in your kids' lives, then that's really good. Then you can let them always know that they are not fatherless, that God is their father, and that whether you are there or whether they are not there, that they are not fatherless. But if you don't have that, you can know now that God's your father. And you can know that you have something, and you can stop allowing the labels that everybody gives to you to make you feel like you're less. Because to say that we have a father, no matter how we are labeled, is a very powerful statement. And if we would only embrace that and receive that, we would stop needing therapy, we would stop needing all these things all the time, we would stop needing so much help all the time, and we could just walk and stand proud to say that we have a Father who has set us where we need to be, who has set us in the family that we need to have. And instead of looking so much at biology and looking so much at what we're trying to get from our society, we could just receive what God has given us, and that is a family in Him.